City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded August 12, 2019.
We'll call the Stevens Point Finance Committee Monday, August 12th to order. And we'll get right to the action items, discussion and possible action on. Item 1 is the presentation of the 2018 audit report by Baker Tilly. Corey, if you could introduce our person here.
Yes, so this is Carla Gogan from Baker Tilly. She's been doing our audits for quite some time, at least as long as I've been with the City of Stevens Point, so she's quite familiar with the city, and she will be walking you through just kind of the basic financials as far as how the city is doing.
Good afternoon and thank you. I am Carla Gogan, a partner with Baker Tilly. I'd like to think that everyone's here to listen to the audit report, but I'm guessing that's not the case. But you're going to get a little lesson in governmental accounting tonight. But I will move things along. The content that I'll be going through tonight is very consistent with what you've seen in the past. The good news is there aren't surprises. When we come in to do the audit, the city is very well prepared, so I want to thank them for that. We did not have any material journal entries related to any of the city or utility funds, which should give you confidence in the information that you're receiving throughout the year. So again, there should be nothing that really comes as a surprise tonight. I want to thank the staff and management for the good work that they do in getting ready for our audit. From an audit opinion perspective, we've issued a clean or an unmodified audit opinion. It's what you've received in the past. It's what you should expect to receive. It's the highest level of assurance that you can receive on your audited financial statements. So I will go through highlights tonight. We're going to start with the general fund. The general fund is the main operating fund of the city. It's where you have your expenditures related to public safety, public works, general government, and this provides a snapshot of what you plan to do in 18. So the middle column is your budget, and the actual is what you did do or accomplished in 2018, and then the variances. And you're going to see you performed well compared to your budget. Revenues were over. One driver of that was investment income, finally seeing some investment returns, and that's positively impacted the clients that I work with. The expenditures, you were under what you had budgeted, and if you look at the budget to actual results in the financial statements, you'll see that many of the functional categories were under budget, and I'm sure as Corey's prepping you for the 2020 budget, you'll be talking about that in more detail. So the bottom line is you plan to actually draw down cash or use fund balance of approximately $745,000, but you actually increased your fund balance by $627,000, so you had a positive variance of $1.3 million. So where that translates, again, if you look to the general fund, your main operating fund, this is your equity position of the general fund. So if you take the assets, which is primarily cash and receivables, back off liabilities, what you have left is your fund balance, and it's broken into the various categories. This is driven by professional standards, so if you were to compare your statements against any other municipality in the country, you would see these similar categories. When I compared these against last year's fund balance amounts, they were all fairly consistent. Non-spendable, the majority of this represents loans that the general fund has made, primarily to TIF number 6 with another loan to TIF number 8. Your assigned fund balance, these are amounts that you are carrying forward to the subsequent year, also represents some payment in lieu of taxes that you receive from the utilities. Your unassigned fund balance is monies that don't necessarily have strings attached. So again, as we look to the previous page, total fund balance went up about $627,000. Your unassigned fund balance went up $480,000. So the metric we look at is on this next page. And we look at one metric, and then we'll talk about the city's policy. But we look at unassigned fund balance. And again, these are the funds in the general fund that don't necessarily have strings attached to it. And we compare that to your current year, or excuse me, your subsequent year's expenditure budget. And you're at about 48%. And you'll see that in the graphic below. While we talk about 1 year's results, we also show, as you know, 5-year trend analysis. And I think what's equally important as to how you did for the year, but what are your trends? Are you showing stable results? Are the results improving? Are they declining? And then are there reasons behind that? You can see that your fund balance position unassigned has stayed very consistent, and that is viewed positively by bond raters. If you look toward the bottom of this underneath the graphic, your acceptable range per city policy is 4 to 6 months of the subsequent year's budgeted expenditures, which was essentially your acceptable range of unassigned fund balance was from 8 to 12 million, and you're at 11.5 million, almost 11.6. So you're within the range that you've set as a governing body to stay within. I'd also welcome, if you do have questions, feel free to jump in as I go versus waiting until the end, because I'm going to shift gears now away from fund balance. And again, you're performing within the policy that you've set. Another metric we look at is your debt position. So this next graphic shows your general obligation debt position. You can borrow up to 5% of your equalized value, and that is what is set by state statute. And GO debt is secured by your taxing authority because the statute allows you to levy for the debt to pay the debt holders. They view that as positive, which it is, and also affords you a beneficial interest rate typically when borrowing versus, say, in the private industry, in the private sector. So you can see you had 27.8 million of GO debt outstanding. And if you go below that, you'll see GO debt capacity of 96 million. Again, that's 5% of your equalized value. And then you look at the percent of debt limit, and you're at 29%. So that's at a 5-year low. And again, you have a number of active TIF districts which are utilizing general obligation debt. So this is a very favorable percentage from a GO debt perspective. The other debt metric we'll look at is of your operating budget in the general fund, how much are you spending on debt service? So for those of you in the audience, it's kind of like if you go to the bank for a mortgage and the bank will tell you of your annual salary, here's how much you can afford in terms of an annual monthly or as an annual mortgage payment. Same is true here, although we look at it on an annual basis. So your total debt was about 6.2 million of principal and interest compared to your operating costs of 36 million, and you're at about 17%. Again, bond raters would say they want to see you at that 20% mark. And again, you've consistently performed under the 20% mark. And again, 17.25% is the lowest it's been. Yes?
Thank you. Just one question or comment, and I don't know if you have the answer or Corey does, but it's interesting to follow the trend from 2014 to 2018 and the amount of interest paid. And even though the amount the principal is larger, the amount of interest keeps going down, and I'm wondering if that's a reflection of what's going on in the market?
And Corey can...
Yes, and it is, and one thing to keep in mind as well is that, when we issue bonds, we typically issue them for a period of 10, sometimes even up to 20 years, depending on what the project is. And at that time, it's a fixed interest rate that gets locked in. So even though, 2014 interest rates were also low, at that point, we were still, paying off some higher interest rate debt that was at a fixed rate. Okay. So that's why sort of once the market moves, it takes some time to kind of pay off your old debt that might be at a higher interest rate and replace it with debt that's of a lower interest rate. And then the only other thing to note is that while the principal payments went up, the interest that we're paying is on our total outstanding debt, and that has stayed relatively stable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. So any other questions on general fund, fund balance, or debt? Because I'm going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about the TIF districts. So you have 5 active TIF districts, and near the bottom of the page, it talks about net cost recovered or recoverable through TIF increments as of 12/31/18. And so you'll see for TIF number 5, for example, 2.1 million, which means that in terms of the revenues that have come in and the expenditures that you still have $2.1 million of revenues basically to collect to offset the expenditures. But you'll see based on the last day to incur project costs at the very bottom and last year to collect increment. So TIF number 5 has until 2032 in order to collect increments. So there's a long runway that still remains on the TIF districts that we've listed here. But above, we listed the sources of funds coming in and then the uses of those funds for the 5 TIF districts. Okay, I'm going to shift gears under the utility operations, unless there are any questions. So the governmental activities that I covered are primarily financed with tax dollars and intergovernmental revenues, and now we're going to shift gears to the enterprise funds, which are full accrual funds, and their operations are financed through user charges that are charged to the users of the systems. And so you have a number of utilities, and we'll talk about each one briefly. The first being your water utility, which is a regulated utility. All water utilities in the state of Wisconsin are regulated by the Public Service Commission. And you'll see a comparison of operating revenues. You did implement a water rate increase in September of 2018. So that, along with an increase in consumption, did increase revenues in 2018. Ultimately, operating expenses were fairly flat, just really some inflationary type increases in expenses. Then we have your wastewater utility. Typically, wastewater usage follows water consumption, and the sewer or wastewater utility did have a rate increase also, which was effective in September of 18. That, along with an increase in usage, resulted in an increase in revenues. And really, the expenses stayed fairly consistent with the prior year. Mainly inflationary wage increases were the driver. You also have your stormwater utility. There was no rate adjustment in 18, and you can see your revenues are consistent and fairly flat. The expenses did go up related to some maintenance and some stormwater infrastructure, along with a stormwater study. Your transit operations, you did include a new or newly acquired service area, and you can see that then in the operating revenues and the operating expenses related to transit. And down below on each of these, we talk about what it means, so it gives you a little bit of an explanation in terms of for that particular utility, summarizing what I've discussed. You have your airport. Operating revenues were up due to fuel sales, jet fuel sales, but then the corresponding operating expenses were up as well. So 2 metrics that we look at related to the utilities. One is debt coverage. So we talked about GO debt associated with the taxing authority securing the debt. When it's revenue bonds, it's the revenue streams of the utilities that secure the revenue bonds that are outstanding. And the bondholders of revenue bonds require in the bond resolution that there has to be a certain coverage factor. So they take a look at, and it's defined, certain revenues, your operating revenues plus investment income backing off O&M expenses to get a computed net earnings, and that's compared against the highest annual debt service. And you can see that it shows the required coverage factor of 1.1 and 1.25, and at the bottom, water was an actual coverage of 3.76 and wastewater at 3.37. So meeting their debt coverage ratio for the utilities. The last metric we'll look at tonight is unrestricted funds on hand. So just on the governmental funds, how we talked about fund balance and the importance of unassigned fund balance. In the utilities, we look at unrestricted cash and unrestricted cash on hand at the end of the year. And typically what we recommend is 1/4 of cash on hand plus some contingency. So you'll see what the minimum would be in that first line compared to what the actual unrestricted funds are. Utilities do have restricted funds on hand, usually related to replacement items, as well as restricted funds that are required by the bond documents. Again, unrestricted cash, and then this shows you the actual quarters on hand. So the main thing, to have a healthy community is to have healthy fund balance in your general fund, making sure you're keeping your debt at a managed level. In the utilities, it's really ensuring you're meeting your debt coverage ratios for bondholders, and then making sure that your unrestricted cash is sufficient to cover operations, as well as, again, I mentioned those contingency things, so you're not always having to borrow for items as they come up. So overall, healthy results consistent with what you've seen in the past, and I think the trends would show very consistent results from year to year. Any questions or comments? I think the only other thing I would just quickly mention is we do issue a required communication letter. If anything, the city has been proactively addressing points that we've made in the past and recommendations, but I would encourage you to take a read through that. As well as I'd encourage you to read the management's discussion and analysis, which is part of the audited financial statement. So if you can't quite make it through the big bulk of the statements, the MD&A is a fairly reasonable read, I would say, in terms of talking about government finance operations. So, any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Corey, any comments? None?
I mean, if I had to comment on anything, I would just say that I think the key as far as our goal is stability. We don't want to see big fluctuations in our fund balance or our savings. And also, we don't want to see big fluctuations in the amount of debt. Specifically, we don't want to see our debt increase significantly. And I think that we've kind of been hitting both of those as far as keeping it stable and then also doing our best to meet the capital needs of the city as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we move to item 2. It's the approval of the 2020-2023 ambulance service provider agreement between Portage County and the city of Stevens Point. And I'm sure, Corey, you can walk us through this?
Yes, so, and this contract was also already approved by the Police and Fire Commission. One thing to note would be the financials. Basically, what we were able to negotiate with the county is an inflationary increase in the contract amount of 1.5% for 2019, and then 2.5% for 2020, 21, 22, and 23. And that 2.5 was really based on our union contracts and what we needed to settle for in terms of a cost of living adjustment. We do have a 3-year contract with the fire union, 2.5% increases every year. So for 2019, we are making a little concession there as far as running things a little bit closer to the edge in terms of the difference between the 2.5% increase in costs versus 1.5% increase in the contract amount. However, the fire department usually does a pretty good job of managing their expenses for the system overall, and we feel that that we can handle that.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for Corey? Mayor?
Go ahead with the question.
My one question is, well, a comment first, so for the folks in the audience, 2019, this contract actually expired, and we continued on a sort of month-to-month. Yeah.
Yes, the contract was good through December 31st of 2018.
Right.
We have been operating, that was included in that same contract of a continuation. It's not month to month. It automatically extended for 1 year
Yeah.
when that deadline was missed.
I think that's what people can connect with most. So I appreciate that it's finally done, and hopefully when we come to 2023, we won't have to wait into the next year to have this happen. My question is on 2019, what is that difference? I know that we've given the firefighters an additional increase in their
About a 1%.
but from an amount.
As far as an amount between the 2.5 and 1.5, it's about $20,000.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So not insurmountable for the fire department to sort of manage.
No, not insurmountable, and then we're also working on, working with the fire department to bring forward a budget amendment as well.
Okay.
Just to amend their budget for 2019, because
To
of course.
reflect this.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Okay. Mayor?
For those watching and listening, just to avoid confusion, I know we talk a little bit about, well, both Corey and President Johnson have mentioned the fire department. Our firefighters are all paramedics. Every one of our firefighters is also a paramedic level trained EMS person. And we will continue to provide two paramedic service to the citizens of Portage County through the Stevens Point Fire Department for the next at least 4 years. Took a while to get there, and I want to thank everybody who was at the table. We had members of the county, and two of them are here, County Executive Holman and County Board Chair Al Haga, along with representatives from the Sheriff's Office and city personnel. Corey was there, our city attorney, Logan Beveridge, a couple members of the Police and Fire Commission, and we hammered it out there. The county was working on 3 separate contracts because Amherst and Plover also provide EMS service, ambulance service for the county. So they were working on those contracts concurrently. But there was never any lapse in contracts. I want to make sure that people know that. We put those things in there just because sometimes negotiations take a little longer than we hoped. It's not the best contract for either side, but we are confident, and Corey's confident, that we can make up the small difference this year and hopefully going forward, we won't have a gap to fill. And I want to thank again everybody who was involved in the creation of this contract.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions for Corey from the audience? None? Well, back to the committee here. I guess I'm looking for a motion.
Motion.
Moved. Sean,
Want to take it, Sean?
second?
Yep.
Mrs. Johnson, seconded. Any more discussion? We'll call for the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion is carried. Item 3 on our list here is renewal of the agreement with Portage County regarding delinquent special assessments and charges. Corey, I guess you're up again.
Yes, so we have a contract or an agreement with the county as far as how things will work with delinquent special assessments and special charges in the event that we put a special charge against a property, and let's say if it wouldn't get paid off in August, that gets transferred to the county, and basically they take that receivable along with any taxes that are due. And due to having a few larger raise orders out there that could result in a large special charge, I did just review this contract again just to make sure that everything is clear and that it works for the city. And there are some things that I'm working on getting clarified with the county, and I think I've been working with Corporation Counsel, and our reading of things is actually similar, so that's good. But I would like to get a more formal, rather than just having an email from the county saying, yeah, we agree that that's what this means, look to get that clarified a little bit more. And this contract actually automatically renews each September 1st. So what I would like to do is to terminate this contract, and then I can work with the county on getting a successor contract in place. This process, as far as transferring the special assessments and special charges, doesn't happen until, basically, we would be talking about the charges that would transfer in 2020, in August of 2020. So we do have some time to get that in place.
Okay, any questions for Corey? The Mayor?
Corey, do you need an action to
It looks like we'd have to
Terminate?
terminate.
terminate the contract, or is it no action in allowing the contract to terminate?
Because the contract automatically renews, if
Okay.
not terminated, I do need an action to terminate.
It was in your memo.
I'll move
Over.
to terminate the
Whiskey?
agreement with Portage County regarding delinquent special assessments and charges.
Second.
Seconded by Alderperson Johnson. Understand the motion? Any more questions, discussion? We'll call for the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion is carried. Next item on the list is number 4, discussion on city-county property exchange. This was put on the agenda by request of Alderperson Jennings. So maybe she would like to start first, and then we'll move along to any and everybody who wants to talk about it. Hopefully, name and address when you get up to the podium, and right to the point, whatever.
Tori Jennings, Alder District 1. In the packet, which is available to the public, as well as the memo that I wrote to this Finance Committee, I did request this as a discussion and possible action item, but the action was omitted from my submission. I just want that known. I don't think that was intentional, and I think it's been remedied. The chair could address that. In my I'm not going to read my memo because it's quite long. I outline the significance of this decision for this city council. However, there has been no discussion in public with city council regarding this issue. And so that was one of the reasons I brought this forward and put it on an agenda so that the public and council members would have the opportunity to discuss this in the open, which I think is really important. So I invite people to read my memo because I provide important background to this. And I just, since I'm up here, I'll read a letter so that I don't have to come back again. Or actually, I'll put this on hold and I'll come back again when there's time. So is that to the
Okay.
point enough?
Yes,
Thank
it'll
you.
be fine. I'd like to call maybe on the county representatives. I think both of you guys want to say something, so. County executive?
So,
Chris Holman, Monday through Friday, 1462 Strongs. If I'm lucky, on the weekends, I get back to 600 Oak Road back in Custer. Thank you very much. For the sake of time and because people are listening and watching, I will read through what I've presented here, and I didn't make enough copies for everybody, so I apologize for that. You never really know who's all going to show up, but I will make this available on the county website and ask the chair that it be added to the minutes as well. So without further ado, good evening. Below are a few bullet points that you'll see that will hopefully shed some light on this conversation from the county's perspective. If you, anyone you know, or anyone you know of has any follow-up questions or comments, I am happy to continue setting up meetings, phone calls, or in-person discussions to address them. And I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has tonight as well. So my contact information is at the bottom of the memo. But number one, first and foremost, thank you for holding the meeting. It has been nearly 6 months now where the county has discussed the various possibilities within the city's land swap proposal. The county has not moved out of the conceptual stage of planning because of the uncertainty many feel in the absence of a concrete discussion, like this one, within the city about its proposal and the county board's recent 13-10 vote. Number two, we have invested staff time and several $1,000s into investigating the proposal because it came to us from all three areas you'd want to hear from: the city council, the mayor, and city staff. I realize the city council's piece was in closed session, but nevertheless, there was implicit support there. So this lent it the credibility we needed to have in order to entertain exploring the possibility in concept. Number three, no matter what the city decides on this issue, I remain committed to identifying all areas where collaborative, mutually beneficial efforts can be explored. We are already in an era for local government where longer-term survival will hinge upon our finding ways to work with each other. Number four, many frame this conversation as this or that, and despite what some have said, I am most interested in the dialogue that's needed to move the conversation forward in a if this, then that, or if not this, then that, or then what kind of conversation. And if you want to have any follow-up on that, the Kettering Foundation does a wonderful job of presenting this approach to conversation. And it's like more of a dialogue versus debate approach, which I find to be illuminating. Number five, the county has most recently been working on these questions since April 2018, when the county board voted to move forward with the concept exploration of a downtown location. The cost estimates for a downtown project were reported to the county board by me earlier this year, and I explained that aside from possible complications with the available space, and there are varying opinions on different aspects of that, The cost estimates given to us were not numbers we could responsibly work with. Inaction from the county over time, coupled with cost escalations, means that the overall cost has increased, and it will likely continue to increase each year that this is put off. Number 6, if the city withdraws its proposal framework, the county will move on. It's okay. Deteriorating infrastructure doesn't care what any of us think. So what's most important is that we look at our deficiencies and address them, as we both seek to do so, and I mean the city and the county, because we have similar concerns. There will likely be other opportunities to explore. Number 7, and I included this one because there's been a lot of conjecture in the public and elsewhere about whether or not the public's been made aware of things. And so I just want to be very clear about how we attempted to get public engagement and present a public face on this issue. So it's important to note that every step along this path has been approved by county committees and the county board, and with what I said earlier, the implicit support from the city. The county held 10 publicly noticed meetings on this topic prior to the June 18th county board meeting, where it was discussed and voted upon. Aside from tonight's meeting, the August 6th Space and Properties meeting was the most recent time this topic has been discussed. We continue to try and create opportunities for more public engagement, and as this conversation evolves over time, please keep an eye out for them. All information relating to this topic, and that includes architectural renderings and graphic designing and all these other pieces that have been talked about again in concept, is maintained and updated on the Portage County website. You can find it by clicking on the Current Projects tab, which is on the homepage. It's in the Spotlight section, and then you would click on the New Government Facility Project. Again, that's just referencing the idea in general. And what follows is a table of all the meetings the county has had, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that those meetings were taking place, lest anybody think that anyone was not trying to talk about this in public. So where are we now? We are still in the preliminary or conceptual phase, i.e. no major steps taken. To be clear, this is the terminology that the architects we've been working with use to describe where we are and have been in the process, and they're not arbitrary descriptors. Regrettably, there has been some confusion on this point. Overall, a decision on anything related to infrastructure does not seem to be on the horizon at this time. And I related the same thing to the Space and Properties meeting last week, where I also noted that it would be, in my opinion, foolish to invest any money in the next stage, even though we have authorization to do so, given that the county board is not quite sure where it is on the issue, and also given some degree of uncertainty around the city and county's relationship on this topic in general. So there is clearly a need for more constructive dialogue if we are to consider any next steps, and I mean any, in any direction on anything. And absent the 19 county board supervisors agreeing to a starting point for our long-term planning, and I reference 19 because no matter what anybody decides to do, 19 county board supervisors have to come to an agreement in order to borrow money to fund any potential outcome. We will continue this holding pattern for the time being. That said, as I will continue to note, infrastructural issues don't care if people can agree or not. They will continue to worsen until we do something to resolve them. I hope these clarifying remarks can play a constructive role in your conversation today and moving forward, and I'm always happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess, do you have any questions for, no questions? Good. I guess we'll go to Mr. Aga. Oh, the question, there's a question in Cindy, it's Alderperson Nabel.
Thank you for coming forward and speaking tonight, because this has been quite an interesting conversation that has been thrown around quite a bit. I'm new at this. My name's Cindy Nabel, District 3. Definitely not a politician. In it because I live in a neighborhood that I've been in for 40 years, and that figured I need to figure out and understand why things are the way they are. Because obviously there are reasons, as was stated just now. It is very important that we have more construction.
Excuse me, Cindy?
Constructive.
I hate to interrupt you, but is this going to be a question for him, or are you
Yes.
making a short presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes, we need more constructive conversation. It is very much needed. One of the important questions I have is, it's been stated that and I do understand this is a conceptual phase, but I have a concern that it's been stated many times, and again tonight, that the city supports this. And I myself, if I'm considered part of the city, am not sure what I support. I haven't heard enough. I haven't been at the meetings. I came to one. The majority of them, as all alders, we're not allowed to be there because it's a quorum. So we're not able to be in those conversations. And we need to be. And that's why we need more conversation that's open and constructive, and that everybody has a chance to talk. I need to learn more. I can't make a decision. So I ask that we do have some more of those public forums, because they did have one for the city part of it, and I do understand there were some for outside city line areas, but I know that we were brought forward, and I'm just being very honest, we were brought forward to ask in a closed session, what were our thoughts, to knowing that we have to do something with our city building we have here. We all know it. What would our thoughts be if we tried to do something with the county that would be a flip, a flop, whatever you want to call it, but some kind of trying to look at things together? And we agreed, yes, we would be interested in hearing that. So I just want to say, the city, yes, we do support discussing it. But that is as far as it ever got for all of us as council members, and I just wanted to really reconfirm that to people. I do want to hear more. I want to understand it. I wasn't around how many years ago when this was discussed, so I'm really open to hearing all the different ideas, and I appreciate that it's being brought back forward again, and I thank you. Thanks.
I missed
Was
the
there a
question. You had a question?
The question is, can we have a public forum to do this discussion with a way that we as alders can also be involved? And I know that we have made some, what would you call the right word for it? Some better ways of being able to do that, by if we now have talked about, we need to confirm that we are coming to a meeting, and if they know that there's going to be a quorum, then that has to be put into the paper. So there's such a lengthy, that I didn't understand, that goes through that to make it so we can be there. So there is a way, but it's a legal way that a lot of us didn't understand how that worked. So I didn't attend those meetings because I didn't want to make a quorum. So
Thank
I'd
you.
appreciate if we could do something so we can do that.
Thank you. I don't think he can answer that question, but.
No.
Well, I think that's what we're doing right
Yes,
now.
I think
is
we're just
having
doing right now. Any
another-
more questions for the administrator? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd like to make a comment to that.
You
Yeah.
gotta-
If you could.
You gotta go up to the thing.
Got yelled at.
Yeah.
Trouble already.
Al Haga, Portage County Board Chair. I agree. It's almost like it's a catch-22. We get stuck in the middle of this, how the two entities can talk, because we have to worry about walking quorums or having too many people or at a meeting and not having it noticed correctly. But I have to think that between the mayor, myself, and the executive, we can try and figure out some way, some committee, whether it's Space and Properties on the county side, that we can get together and have that kind of discussion and bring that information forward, because it is important, and we have spent a lot of time, a lot of staff's energy and trying to figure out what's the best for Portage County and what makes the most sense, and explain the reasons why we have tried to come up with these solutions. So I think that between the three of us, we can come up with something where we can work towards trying to get everybody together that needs to hear it from the two separate entities. So
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to work towards that. So
Sure. Thank you very much. I guess I'm going to ask again out there, whoever wants to talk on this subject and make your presentation. I think I'm going to have to limit it to 3 minutes. And as we move along, hey, timer right here. Amir?
So, just a couple of things, because there's reasoning, and as illogical as it may seem, there's logic to a lot of the things that are done. We're talking about quorums. I'm not sure if everybody understands what that means, but it's enough people to either make a positive or negative impact on a deciding body. So typically for committees, it's 3, because we have 5 on a committee. For council and county board and those committees, it's different, but you have to notice that that group is going to be there. When it's something like this, in this case, the one that I think the Alder Nabel referenced was, it was a county meeting discussing the topic of the swap, and the alders, had they been there, they could have violated that quorum rule and participated. So we had been recording all of those meetings so they can at least hear the discussion. It's not the best way to do things at all, because you can't interact with people, you can't necessarily see the reactions of the crowd, those sorts of things, all very good points. The ways that we can do this is having meetings like this. However, and I think Logan's in the overflow room. If Director Ostrowski and Attorney Beveridge are in there, I would ask that they come into this room. I'll step out if I need to. The fire chief is there with our capacity. But I want to talk about the possibility of a conditional use and how that, as the council would act in a quasi-judicial capacity, discussing that or making decisions on a potential conditional use in the future could affect their ability to vote on something that required a conditional use in the future. Logan, can you talk a little bit about that, please?
So the consideration of a conditional use permit is a quasi-judicial function. You have a hearing, you have standards that are evaluated. Those standards are written into the zoning code, and they derive from a statute, a state statute that governs zoning. So what happens is you have an application that's made, you have testimony that's taken at the hearing, and there has to be a determination that applies those standards to the evidence, so to speak, in terms of what's in the application and the statements that are made both by the applicant, members of the public, and the staff at the hearing. And much in the same way that if a judge were to comment with a very strong opinion about a matter of public concern, then if that matter were to come before that judge, it would be appropriate for the judge to recuse themselves and for a different judge to handle the matter. It's, you at the very least lose the perception of fairness with regards to the evaluation of those standards in a way that is based upon the evidence rather than a personal opinion about it. Now, somebody could say, well, I evaluated everything there was to be evaluated before I came to the conclusion that I voiced publicly. Well, that might be the case, but the applicant has a right to have the application be considered based upon what they've put in their application, what has been presented at the hearing, rather than what got out into the public, comments made prior to any of that occurring. And obviously, we haven't had any sort of application here. So I think that concern is it is a valid one. It's not something that can just be dismissed. I mean, there's case law out there showing in the context of zoning, in the context of conditional uses, that you can sort of poison the well, so to speak, with regards to comments that are made publicly ahead of time. Now, if somebody has a personal opinion about something they've kept to themselves, well, I mean, that's life. That's how it is. Nobody comes in as sort of a complete blank slate to a matter that has a judicial aspect to it. But when that has been made very public, it changes things.
Thank you very much. Was Director Ostrowski in there?
He was.
May I ask?
He was, because we just...
He's in the back.
Oh, he is in the back. Okay. I want to talk to you, have you come up after President Johnson's question, maybe, and talk about what conditions or what circumstances might warrant a conditional use in this case.
Well, maybe that's where I'm going, because it's kind of like, okay, so in the course of a public meeting that is duly noticed, where we're talking about an issue that could potentially be related to a property issue where there could be a conditional use, we should shut up.
Well, I think for you to put it in those types of terms is, how should I put this? It does a disservice to the nuance of the situation. You have
Trying to remove the nuance.
It is
so that we can understand.
So you have no proposal on the table right now at all. There hasn't been a request for a conditional use permit. But certainly, when we're talking about the location of public facilities of these types, it's extremely likely that there could be a conditional use permit required for them to be located in any given space. And then that would have to be put through the normal process that we use for those, as we see many, many times every year. And to prejudge the appropriateness of a facility of this type being located wherever, it runs afoul of the requirements for persons who are acting on that type of application to be fair, to be unbiased towards it. If like I said, if you have a circuit court judge who's come out publicly and said, I think zoning variances are wrong, no matter what the case. Well, if I apply for a zoning variance and it's denied, and then I appeal that to the circuit court, well, how can I feel like I'm getting a fair shake in front of that judge? Even if the judge then says, oh, well, of course I'm going to look at the law and the facts and be fair. Well, whether or not the judge acts based upon their best, most unbiased judgment there, the person who's made the application and gone before the court, if they don't end up getting their appeal granted, they're never going to feel like they got a fair shot. And that's the ultimate thing that you have to think about when it comes to the court system or any sort of legal process, is it's paramount that if a person doesn't get the result they want, they at least feel like they got a fair shake in court. So it becomes this situation where, unless and until everything is really on the table, it's going to be this location, it's going to be this facility with this design, with these considerations put into noise and traffic and light spillover and everything we look at with regards to, here are the surrounding uses, here's how they will interact, here's what's being done in terms of conditions to minimize the negative impacts to the surrounding types of zoning uses. None of that's been done yet. When would that stuff have occurred? Once an actual application is filed and it's being heard by the appropriate body. So this is a little bit of a catch-22 situation in that regard. And sometimes that is the case. It's if the city council is talking about liquor licensing, that's a more generalized thing where you have dozens of different applicants in town that all have a business general type in common. You can say, well, here's what we think about liquor licensing in general. But here, there's nothing general about it. You have one entity, Portage County, trying to build a relatively specific type of facility, and there's been a debate that's been narrowed down roughly to two fairly specific locations. And it's a unique scenario, but certainly this is something where it could merit me putting together some more detailed legal research to present to the council in that regard. But I was asked to put some thought into it tonight. Michael and I had discussed it, and I think that there are real concerns there. Now, certainly I always am willing to advise council members of any body or commission of the city as to whether or not they need to recuse themselves from decisions. Typically, it's the stuff about personal stake in matters or, friendships with applicants for various things, that kind of stuff. This is a little different. But I guess I would just, at this point, encourage some caution in terms of coming to personal conclusions about the appropriateness of any particular location and voicing those, asking questions, gathering information, talking about financial items. Certainly, this is the Finance Committee. It's not the City Plan Commission, notably. It's not necessarily within the very direct purview of the Finance Committee to consider geographic locations. That's more of a Plan Commission type function. Certainly, it's not improper for the Finance Committee to look at the location of a public facility. But when it's a question specifically of location, it does bring to bear a lot of 6223, where you're talking about the Plan Commission, you're talking about zoning, which obviously, there's a reason that this is on the agenda tonight. It's not necessarily because of the financial issues or the design of the building, it's about the location. So we need to keep that in mind and just remember that there are some quasi-judicial angles to it.
May I?
Sure.
So my understanding is the legislature has removed some of our ability to place conditions in a very narrow framework. So your argument about conditional use has been narrowed by the legislature, restricting local units of government to place additional conditions where they're unwarranted. And I'd have to go back and review that bill. I think it was 2016 maybe or so.
16 or 17.
Yeah, 16, 17, somewhere around in there. So I get your point, but there's also this very narrow path that we find ourselves in as a local municipality for issuing conditional use permits, and mostly allowing them as long as a few check boxes are followed. So I get your point, but there is this narrow lane that we're walking in. So I appreciate your words. I also want to let the audience know that we are restricted to some degree on how we can issue conditional use permits.
Right. And I am also somewhat restricted in how in-depth and in what manner I can address this topic, considering, hi, would you all like to watch me give my client confidential legal advice? So I'm
But that's
walking a
a
bit of a
fact.
tightrope to
But it is a
even
fact that
engage
the
in this question right
legislature
now, so.
did change the conditional use rules for
Right.
local jurisdictions and how they issue those.
Right, and the courts have not been kind either when it comes to the level of discretion that local governing bodies have when
Right.
considering those.
Now,
Thank
that
you.
being said, Logan, if the members of the council who are in this committee just hear testimony, majority of these people are here to speak, just listening to it wouldn't put that quasi-judicial status in jeopardy should the need for a conditional use come up. Is that correct?
No, it wouldn't, and specifically, if you recall, this back in, 2011, 2012, there was a request for a conditional use permit by the school district, and I believe it was for the Life Skills Center that they did eventually build. And the superintendent at the time contacted each individual alderperson prior to a hearing on the conditional use and asked them to come and meet individually and discuss it. And I remember that very distinctly because I was one of those alderpersons who did in fact go and meet with the school superintendent. And a question arose after that regarding sort of ex parte contacts, lobbying members of a body that was going to be acting in a quasi-judicial manner. And eventually the determination was that the superintendent, as a representative of that group, had a right to do that within the guise of the constitutional right to petition your representatives. So I think certainly just having a discussion about this, that's not a problem. The problem would arise based on any statement that could be pointed to as evidence of
Excuse me.
sort of a pre-drawn conclusions about the wisdom of something.
Comments like I'm in favor of or against
Right.
any particular process. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I know that some people may not like to follow all the rules, but we need to at least make sure everybody's aware of it and hopefully give the public a better understanding of why things are the way they are, because they don't sound very logical in some cases. Director Ostrowski, could you maybe come up and talk about, first of all, the statutory requirement of the Plan Commission regarding land use, and then circumstances that might warrant a conditional use at either location?
Sure, this, because of its use, it's called out as a conditional use under our zoning code, so regardless of where it's going to go, it's going to require it to go to the Plan Commission and Common Council and us to review the conditional use standards. The location, design, architectural design of a building, of a public building, is also a matter referred to the Plan Commission under state statutes. And quite honestly, I think as we hear some of the comments tonight, even from Executive Holman, I think it warrants further conversation amongst the groups, and I think a joint meeting of maybe a Plan Commission or Space and Properties Committee would be more appropriate, because right now we're talking about one option, it seems. It's a location in East Park Commerce Center on the outskirts of the city, but as we go through the planning element and looking at these different alternatives, we want to be able to review them objectively and then deny them or move forward with them on its merits. And I think to single out one of them tonight without really doing the full research and hearing a lot of the testimony and then also having conversations with the appropriate bodies, I think would be doing a disservice.
Thank you. And that is, at least in part, why there isn't a slate for action on this item. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments on this subject? Seeing none, we'll move on to the, who's next?
I was ready to move aside.
Go ahead.
Nice job, Mike.
State your name and address, please. Yes, you have to go up to the podium,
Lectern.
or whatever, the thing over there. And we're gonna allow you 3 minutes.
Okay, my name's Tom Brown, 317 6th Avenue in Point. I was a little confused with all this discussion about conditional use, and I understand your caution on your part for what you might say. But as far as I know, the agenda item is discussion about a property swap.
You're okay.
All right, so, anyway, and, you know, even hearing you talking about a conditional use gives me pause about something already somewhat predetermined, so. With that, whether it's true or not, it seems the county is proceeding as if this idea of a land swap is in their best interests and only a matter of time and planning. While we citizens have been assured by both city and county officials that it's only an idea being explored and is very preliminary, I've been an active member of this community for 40 years and have been around the block a few times. I've seen our elected officials lead us down this primrose path until it becomes way too late to have any meaningful input or do anything about it. Pretty soon, preliminary or conceptual becomes a fixed plan with few options for modifying, much less stopping, a project that starts so innocently. While I do not think it's actually in the best interests of the county, I certainly do think that it is definitely not in the best interests of the city. While I can appreciate there appears to be some real and tangible fiscal advantages to the city of such a land swap with the county, these are very short-term in scope and extremely short-sighted in vision. Any short-term fiscal advantages the city might enjoy will ultimately prove to be quite detrimental to our city in the long run. Even with any savings in the cost of new facilities that might result from such a land swap, we'll still be on the hook for considerable costs for any kind of facility, new or remodeled, no matter how they're developed. And so the cost savings from the land swap will pale in comparison to the overall cost of the facility, no matter how it's done. And mostly the long-term external costs that the city would entail. And the costs are enormous. Physically, the city would lose a large portion of the civic heart of the community. Our downtown would be left with a probably vacant city-county building and a useless jail complex, probably needing to be demolished. And the last thing we need is more vacant land that someday might be developed, but more likely will sit vacant, similar to other properties the city has acquired for redevelopment. Only recently have some of these vacant parcels attracted any meaningful attention after years and years of sitting vacant. The economy of our city and our downtown will surely suffer. In addition to the hundreds of jobs that would leave the downtown, the livelihood of the many businesses and restaurants downtown that rely on the patronage of these employees would suffer as well. Many of our downtown businesses are just getting by, and many will be likely to be closed if they realize the reality of the lost patronage after it sets in. There are arguments from the county standpoint, both for and against the potential move. But it's irresponsible for the city to serve as an enabler and help facilitate this move. The city should be dragged kicking and screaming into any such deal, not volunteering to grease the path. Finally, any move by the county will just add to the considerable congestion out in Sprawlville on the east side of town. Such development is unsustainable, car-centric, and just plain ugly. Another piece of Nowheresville, USA. This is not the kind of community we want. So we deserve better from our elected officials, both city and council. I urge this committee, the Finance Committee, and ultimately the Common Council to abandon this idea before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I need to comment.
Sure.
Just for clarification, and maybe it got lost in all of the legal mumbo jumbo. Sorry, Logan. Legal explanation. But the comment that Tom made about something being preconceived or predetermined is absolutely 100% not true. And other people have made that allegation too. But I can tell you this. The county is required to have the courthouse downtown, or in the city of Stevens Point, must be in the county seat. Okay? That is a law. So wherever it gets built, it will be in the county seat. The county board has already voted to build downtown, but they will build somewhere. In August of 2017, and though I disagree with it, the council voted to build a new city hall. The city hall will require a conditional use, regardless of where it's built. Sorry, what? The county board, or the county building, regardless of where it's built, will very likely require a conditional use. So if they build something, it will require a conditional use. That doesn't mean anything is predetermined as to location. But that's why we're talking about conditional use, because regardless of where it's built, it will require a conditional use. All right, just wanted to be clear on that.
Okay.
Thank you. State your name and address.
Sandy Medine, 2101 West River Drive. Thanks for hearing me. Somebody asked earlier, where are we now? Well, we're right here. And I helped to elect some of you. I pay for some of your stipends to come to these meetings. And now I'm asking you to represent me. I'm asking you to vote no for the swap. Plain, simple, and to the point. No. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Just keep on walking.
My name is Sally Topinka, 732 West River Drive, and I'm here tonight to express my opposition to the part of the land swap that would enable the county to move to the far east part of the city. The reasons for this are many, and there are people in this room who have very eloquently stated those at other meetings, and I'm not going to belabor them because we all have other things to do. However, there's one point, and I think he's here, that John Gardner mentioned at the county board meeting that I wanted to bring up because I thought it gets kind of lost in the mix of all the other issues. And I'm going to paraphrase him because I think he brought up the point that the physical proximity of city and county government, I can't talk without my hands, city and county government adds to better communication, better relationships, and consequently better government. And I think that should also be a goal when you decide where you're going to put these buildings. And so I appreciate all the hard work everybody's doing. I know it's been going on 20 years, but I think this moving out of the city-county building and separating the two parts of government is not in the best interest of the county. Thanks.
Thank you.
John Finn, 2125 Clark Street, Stevens Point. I just want to follow up with what Sally said about keeping things together, the county and the city. I can give you two concrete examples of why that worked. About 5 or 6 years ago, when I was still on the bench, we had and before we had security in the courthouse, we had a threat from a litigant, and we took it quite seriously. He had threatened several times. The lawyers were coming to me, telling me they were scared. I got the sheriff together, the police chief. I think we got the mayor involved, and we had to have a meeting right away. There was no room in the courthouse for a meeting, so we used the city city conference room in City Hall. So it's right there. We used it, something to use. All right. On the converse, last year, I was hired by the city to be a hearing officer on a employee problem, and we were assigned to have it in the city conference room. Well, we had a pretrial conference and looked at the number of witnesses, the number of people that would probably come to this thing. And so instead of holding it in that small room, we went across the street to the annex and used the county's conference rooms 1 and 2. That's one of the reasons. Second reason that I think is it's important to keep things together is look at security today. Yes, we have security in the courthouse, but there's nothing like having the police department nearby and the sheriff's department nearby. When you've got county buildings that you're dealing with, the public is in there, and it's just extremely important that you have that backup security. Lastly, we've been talking to a lot of people in the county, and not just in the city, throughout the county. And most people that I have talked to are against this. And the people that were for it told me that they had problems parking downtown. And I'm thinking, you gotta be kidding me. That is a myth. There is parking around that courthouse all the time. The perimeter is all public parking. Now, some of it's for 2 hours. I'm not sure they enforce that, because I know an attorney who's no longer with us that parked in front of the courthouse every day, right in front of those steps. He was there all day. He came from Rapids, didn't want to walk. But, so that's a myth. There's plenty of parking. And most people don't know this, if you want to park in the county lot, just go into the clerk's office, they'll give you a permit if you're going to be there for the day. They'll give you a permit. You can put it on your car. They're not going to give you a ticket. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Joe Sizer, 317 6th Avenue, Stevens Point. A number of years ago, I was one of the people who was promoting the idea that the city in fact did, which was to take some of the transit out of Buchholz Park and move it to the east side, which they have done, so that there is a transit facility, a city transit facility. So, and I was one of the people that encouraged that to happen, mainly from the point of view of connectivity, that I think in the long range, as we're planning for bus transportation and all kinds of transportation in central Wisconsin, we're going to be needing places where we can pick up buses, and that's the hub of that should not be Buchholz Park in Stevens Point. So anyway, I want to indicate that I'm kind of indicate that I have had some opinions about moving some of our facilities, city facilities in this case, to the east side. Well, I know we all want what's best for the city and county, but I do think that generally the location of all these government buildings does matter now and into the future, and the economics of this are very important. So we should reuse and recycle our buildings. We should use less energy in the long run by having the most number of people being the closest to these services and making it easier getting from building to building. And we should facilitate cooperation between the staff of the city and the county. Overall, in other places, my observations are that cities are getting denser. There are tear downs in neighborhoods. There are changes in zoning where a previous single-family unit gets changed to be multifamily, and so in the same size lot, places are putting up apartment buildings of 3 and 4 stories because they need more use in these neighborhoods. Simultaneously, sprawl that has passed its useful life is unsightly, with cracks in the cement, weeds in the boulevards, and empty parking lots due to closed big box stores. Let me clarify, I'm talking about other places than Stevens Point. These same areas, usually on the edges of town, cry out for an alternative, where environmental corridors with grand trees would be much more desirable in terms of how that city has developed and be more inviting to the community as a whole. I do think it's very important that we not do this land swap as such, and that we really make an effort to put as many of those county and city uses in our downtown. I hope like me that you support the existing downtown with the existing infrastructure of roads, water, and sewer, and a strong, viable center of government services, businesses, and the arts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Seitz?
Hi, I'm Will Stites from 425 Buchholz Avenue, and I'd like to recommend everyone take a look at a very nice news source for the state of Wisconsin called urbanmilwaukee.com. And on August 5th, it showed an article with the title something to the effect of "Wisconsin is getting old." And it has a really nice interactive graphic you can play with to show the population structure by age as it changes through the decades in rural, what they call micropolitan, and metropolitan areas, and in the state as a whole. And what it shows is something most of us actually already know, which is Wisconsin is getting older, the population is pretty close to stagnant, and this is especially true in the smaller the area you go to. So Stevens Point, the population has fluctuated a little in the last few years, but it's fairly constant. It is growing older. And if we don't want Stevens Point and Portage County to be on a slow glide path to being a ghost town and a ghost county. We need to encourage the kind of development and the kind of management of our land that will attract the young, dynamic, entrepreneurial people to stay here and to come here from other places. And what this demographic likes is an urban area that's walkable, bikeable, and that has the services contained in a small area. If we encourage the kind of development such as allowing the courthouse to move out to the fringe of the city, that is utterly contrary to this type of development, and it will tear a big hole in the heart of our community. The vitality of Stevens Point is integral to the vitality of Portage County, so we need to do what we can to maintain the downtown area as a vital hub for all the services that people use. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Who's next? Liz, are you up?
Yes, sir. My name is Liz McDonald, 1760 Strongs Avenue. I already spoke at a city council meeting and at a county board meeting regarding this particular issue, so I won't take the time to go through all of that. I agree with most everything that's been said so far this evening. One of the things that the mayor mentioned is that Stevens Point is the county seat, and I think it's important that we recognize that downtown and the government buildings are the heart of the county, and that the central city really is the best location for the county and city offices. The city and county already own plenty of land in the downtown area and plenty of buildings that we could either repurpose or tear down and build something else. I think we should really not be considering putting the county offices out on the east side. Also, isn't the proposed land in this land swap in a TIF district? I think it is, and I really thought that would defeat the purpose of a TIF district by putting a government building out in it. The savings have been mentioned as a reason that we would save a lot of money by doing this land swap, building something new out there. But the savings in the short term is not a good excuse for what in the long term would prove to be a mistake. There's also plans for in the development that are in the development phase for downtown and for the Division Street corridor, and both of those plans call for revitalization and for more housing to be built in the central city area. And as Will was stating, that's what people are looking for, a walkable community. And moving the county offices out of town would not contribute to that. Also, one of the concerns that I have is that the current county city building, in any of the plans that I have seen, there is no specific plan for it if this land swap would go through. And I'm wondering if it would become another lullaby site, that we're sitting on it for years with nothing happening to it. So I'd really like to ask that the city reconsider the whole idea of a land swap and look at the alternatives that we have in the downtown area. Thank you.
Thank you. Name and address, please.
Richard Ripple, 1972 Church Street. Good evening. I agree with what everyone has said here tonight. I'm also against this land swap. I think it would be interesting to see some of the information on what transforming the current county annex, building onto it. Chris spoke about building up, and the building can go up, but that's of course the most expensive way to go. But why couldn't it go out toward Ellis Street or the other direction towards Water Street? You could add on whatever you need. You'd be dealing with 4 floors in both directions. Yes, it's going to take some parking space, but we don't want to talk about parking. There is enough parking here tonight, and if you can't park right in front of the place you want to go, then come back another time. But there's plenty of parking in Stevens Point. This land swap seems to involve Portage County Public Library and the ADRC, the Lincoln Center. I don't know what that means. I don't know who controls which. Maybe it's shared between the city and the county. I don't know how it's funded. I don't know what that would mean if that were to happen. So that's an open question. And I think a little bit, for all of us who live downtown, we live here for a reason. We don't live in the suburbs. We're not in Plover. We're not commuting on the outside. We're down here because we like to walk to the post office. I like to pay my taxes in City Hall. If I'm on jury duty, I don't want to get in my car and drive 7 miles out there to find out, oh, we don't need you today. Go home. It would make a lot of sense if this were downtown. And I think we have to think of the next generation, and that's been alluded to tonight, the millennials. If you want to attract the younger crowd here, and you certainly do, we're talking about the lullaby sites, a lot of new housing downtown, rental property, new condos, new shops. It's all going in the right direction. Art destination, working on that. Moving the county government out to a campus is sort of 1970s thinking in my regard. I mean, that's moving it out to the suburbs, which are struggling to survive in terms of shopping and such things. So I think we need to think about them. They want to live downtown. They want to walk to work. They may not want to own a car. They want bike routes and all these things we've heard about, talked about tonight. So I think that's something to consider. Yeah, we mentioned the difficulty of transportation were to be put out there. I guess I would just like to see some figures on why it's prohibitively expensive to redo the annex building. I know the jail's a big problem. There's a lot of empty lots around there. Somehow that could be figured out, I would think. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So real quick, the reason the Lincoln Center and the ADRC and the library are on there, right now they are both owned by the city. Both buildings are owned by the city, but the functions within them are wholly operated by the county. And that would change nothing except the name on the deed. And that could actually happen anytime. We could swap that over. It's a much bigger conversation. Give me a call and we can talk about that. I just wanted to make sure people understood that it was because the city owns the buildings, but the county operates the facility.
Carol Malewski, 2125 Clark Street. I just wanted to say what Tom Brown said was pretty much what I wanted to say, but in a more eloquent way. But I also think that the downtown is the heart of the city, is the heart of the county. And if, I should have brought a big picture, but if you look at where you want to put, or the swap would involve, this outside corner of the city, way out here, it's almost the same as going to Jordan Park. Not quite, I think perhaps it stops at Torrin Road. Is that where the city stops? Somewhere up there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, by Jordan, yes.
Okay, so that's kind of the same distance away from the downtown. There had been mention a while ago that if you put the county building out there, it's closer to the center of the county, but that just doesn't seem like a reason at all, because out there, they're big boxes. And again, as somebody else had mentioned, big boxes change. The old Walmart is sitting there not completely full. It doesn't mean because Crossroads Commons exists the way it does now that is a vital part of the city. I really think because we need go-to places downtown, the county, the city, buildings should be together. The post office is down there, the library is down there, the Midstate is down there now, and so is the Arts Center down there. Those are places that are go-to. It keeps the downtown vital. Talking about young people and where they want to live in a place that's vital in a walkable area. If you look at, and I'm not sure whether, I haven't looked at new houses in Stevens Point because I've been in mine forever, but in some cities, they have a walkability number when there's a house for sale. And I think that is really an important thing. The city, the county should be together. It should be downtown. It should be a destination for the downtown. It keeps the downtown vital. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I'll try to be quick, Chair. Trevor Rourke, 601 Washington.
I'm here to share my views as myself and not represent any group. I've watched a presentation on March 26th, a public meeting regarding the land swap, and learned about the potential cost savings, right? And I've talked with other residents about this matter as well. It was presented that there are proposed cost savings and simplification that would occur with this proposal, but all of this is short-term planning. There are a great number of external long-term costs that have not been outlined and need to be discussed before any selection of property or design work proceeds. Further, I understand how historic land uses can conflict, but at the same time complement each other. I understand how old zoning code has diminished returns on acreage and parking demand has not been managed well by the city or the county, and we've heard that here already tonight. I also know a bit about transportation planning and how many efficiencies exist downtown now that are not being represented fairly. This is a consistent fault of most sprawl development in the U.S., and Stevens Point is no exception. Regarding transportation, do the cost savings presented include the additional single passenger vehicle trips that would need to occur on a weekly basis between city staff, county staff, public officials, UWSP, and other institutions that collaborate together every single day? Do taxpayers pay the mileage rate to reimburse all these extra car trips? If not, do staff and public officials pay that out of pocket? Has a heat map been analyzed to review how far away county employees live currently and how walking, biking, and bus routes would need to shift for the majority of these people? Has this shift been compared to the transport time savings of those that would live closer to a new facility near Crossroads Commons? We need to compare those. The difference is an important piece of information, and we should have that as a public, especially because this new site would empower people to drive. How many people in this room, with a show of hands, have walked to Walmart? Anybody bike to Lowe's? Not a single, no? Will? No? Okay. Best Buy, has anybody walked to Best Buy? You have, all right. That's one person. That's my point. So related to this is social disconnection. Building on this land to the east is guaranteed to cause hardly anyone to access the building by foot, bike, or non-motorized wheel. This travel disconnect will cause social disconnection by not allowing people to interact randomly with each other. We see this in neighborhoods every day. It is a beautiful thing. That's how people socialize. It won't allow regular people of certain social or financial status to access the building, causing further class separation and systemic racism. To that latter point, all you have to do is look at the history of red line zoning in Milwaukee and Chicago to understand how bad it can get with urban sprawl. Regarding stormwater runoff, I'll skip this one. Impermeable surfaces from new parking lots create tons of runoff, and we need to assess that too. Regarding climate change, convection, right? Convection is a huge concern when you build new parking lots and use new land and reduce green space. There's a number of additional points I can mention, but I really want to end on a long-term financial note. Nowhere in the discussions and the public presentations have we seen the cost of tax to the taxpayer when the first life cycle of infrastructure fails. What about the third one, right? In other words, how much will it cost the city for these life cycles each time they fail, right? We're talking hundreds of years, right? It's really hard to project hundreds of years, but we should really, community development, comptroller, develop a matrix that looks at, okay, here's everything, after everything's done, we say within 5 years, this is how much the costs, this is how much the savings were. Now, 25 years later, when roads fail, infrastructure fails or so, 25, 50, whatever, we should really look at the long-term costs, and that's what's missing in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And shop local when you can.
Mr. Medine, is that his name?
Thank you, Chairman Phillips. I'm Dave Medine, 2101 West River Drive. There's a bit of an elephant in the room today. What prompted this entire discussion before the county board and the city council is a land swap. Well, let me tell you what the land swap is. We've all got the basics, okay? 3 properties that the county owned would be transferred to the city. The county jail, the ADRC, better known as the Senior Center, and the library would be transferred to the county. 2 properties would be transferred from the city to the county. The county annex would...
I think you're backwards on that,
I got
Dave.
backwards on it. Yeah, you're right. But let me start over. The county jail would be transferred to the city. The city ADRC would be transferred to the county. The city library would be transferred to the county. The existing county annex would be transferred to the city, and the East Park Center property would be transferred to the county. Okay, 5 different parcels. Okay, did I confuse everybody enough that we're all off base on this thing? All right, I want to talk about a couple of the examples of those parcels, so we get a flavor of what has transpired with those properties. Let's start, and let's start with the library, and I don't support the transferring the library or any of the 5 municipal libraries that we have in Portage County. Historically, they all function as community centers with activity meeting rooms, in addition to being library resource centers. They've been located and built by the municipalities to serve their individual communities and their community's needs and their community's area. The Stevens Point Library / Community Center, the Pinery Room with it, was constructed by the city in 1993 with $623,000 from the sale of the Charles M. White Library, which became the First Financial Bank lobby. The county had no say in the location, construction quality, or layout. The county volunteered. It would simply, and this was by an alderman at that time, Kim Erzinger, who was a city alderman, and said, why don't we as a county do a better job with our library services? So the county volunteered. It would simply staff the libraries. The library is part of the building, at least, not the other parts that are activity areas. And they did that in Stevens Point, in Plover, in Rosholt, and in Almond. So it includes supplying the heating and cooling and cleaning to maintain comfort for its staff and the clients. The municipalities would still maintain the buildings, and that's roughly the same contracts that we still maintain, and that's the philosophy that we ought to continue to maintain. Otherwise, the county may end up having to purchase 3 more libraries and maybe even Amherst, which has gone on its own because of they got a major grant from Letty Jensen project and were able to do it on their own. Because the county graciously agreed to staff the libraries, everyone decided to call those libraries a library community, county library, those municipal libraries part of the county library system. Municipalities currently own and generally maintain their own library buildings and grounds, since they're considered municipal county community resource centers. Since the buildings are community resource centers and event centers, county ownership would open a can of worms in scheduling all kinds of community events, probably at the county's discretion, in order to control library staff costs. That's the one, the library for starters. The second thing about the parcel out to the east of Sherwin-Williams, it's an interesting parcel. A couple of months ago, Sandy, who spoke, my wife, and I drove out there to the intersection of R and Double H, and the building would be just north of Double H. We couldn't get through. It was underwater. You could not, without major improvements, you could not get through to that site in circumstances that we had this year. In order to remedy the future problems, the surface water would have to be rerouted, and that's flat land, so that takes a lot of work. And the water table would have to be lowered for the building to have a basement or an elevator well. The parcel's at the edge of the Little Plover watershed. I want to make that clear. It's at the northern end of the Little Plover watershed. And if you want to lower the water table to make that site usable as a building, You might have some controversy with the people living in the Little Plover watershed. And also, the farmers in that area have had some discussion with the people within the watershed and on the Plover River itself. It's a major concern. It's an environmental concern, that location out there. But now, the other thing, the downtown parcel, with the immediately adjoining streets and the interior streets, it's about 10 acres. All the way from the east side of the County City building with this parking lot, all the way to the north side, which is up by the high-rise? Is that one called the high-rise?
Edgewater.
Edgewater, sorry, Edgewater, okay. 10 acres. The conceptual plan that we've been given by the architect shows a campus setting of around 10 acres of buildable area, of developed area. It's a campus setting with separate buildings, just like we have downtown, where you have to walk from one kind of a use to another kind of a use, okay? From a more gentle use, which is general government, where it's the people's building, and you walk outside and go to the Justice Center. Surprisingly enough, downtown has been suggested for 2 stories. This development plan shows 3 stories. And yet, we've all heard that it's, even Richard Ruppel was told that we're going to try to go flat and not go up. And yet the plan, in order to fit on the 23-acre parcel with all of the additional land that's necessary for water management, that it's still going up 3 stories. You really couldn't put 3 stories in very well because you couldn't put a basement in like you can downtown. And you couldn't put elevators in very well either because that elevator well would go down into the groundwater even on a slab. I think, just gives you a little bit idea about the swap, and I think that the swap is a bad deal for both sides and ought to be killed.
Thank you. Thank you. Who's next?
Nancy Roppy, 925 Smith Street in District 1. I take exception to the suggestion that all of these meetings have been held and that everybody's had an opportunity to, say something. And part of the reason for that is because of the way that this agenda item is noticed. It's inadequate at best. It's so vague that it gives the public virtually no idea of the monumental nature of the topic being discussed. The same kind of subterfuge was used in the agenda for the June 12th County Board meeting. The agenda item there read, authorizing BWBR/Dewberry to commence with the design development on 20 to 25 acres of green space. Wait, what? Although the public is often criticized for lack of engagement, it is precisely these types of agenda item descriptions which confuse the public and prevent civic engagement. I like to think that I'm pretty well informed about local issues, but if it were not for hand-lettered yard signs on Clark and Division, I wouldn't have had a clue about the magnitude of what was to be discussed at that county board meeting. Even after reading the agenda, I wasn't sure what agenda item the topic fell under. This makes it pretty difficult for a member of the public to register to speak on an agenda item when they don't know what that agenda item includes. Perhaps that's the intention. In the memo that Alderperson Jennings included in the packet, she alluded to the long-term implications of moving the county facilities out of the downtown. The loss of Shopko was a massive blow to the downtown. The loss of Century was a massive blow to the downtown. The loss of county facilities would be the death blow to the downtown. It would be like driving a stake into the heart of the downtown. You might as well roll up the sidewalks and turn out the lights because it's going to be game over. The end of downtown revitalization. Also, we have an historic, iconic county city building. And as of yet, no one seems to have an answer as to what will happen if this land swap comes to pass. Well, then maybe we could just let it deteriorate and fall into disrepair until it goes under the wrecking ball, like the fox.
Thank you. Anybody else? Alderperson Nebo.
Mary Kneebone, 5718 Sandpiper Drive, District 7, Alder. I live on the east side. It's a nice place to live. And I hear a lot of you guys talking like we're at the end of the world out there. It's 7 miles for me to drive into the city and pay my taxes. And if it's out there, I can ride my bike to the county stuff. I'm not going to speak one way or the other about it. I truly haven't made up my mind. But I just want to say it's not bad on the east side. It's not such a sprawlville out there. We've got a really nice neighborhood with a couple of really nice parks. Come on, give us a break. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Alderperson Jennings?
Alder Jennings, District 1. So I was written by two people who are not able to attend tonight, and it's Mary Bratz and Dick Stevens. They live in Allman, Wisconsin. They've repeated a number of the things that were said tonight, but I'll just go on with what they say at the end. For many of us, because they do live in the rural areas, for many of us who live outside the city limits, it is not a hardship to travel downtown to access the county municipal buildings. In the 40-plus years that we have lived in the county, we have never had a problem finding parking for business in the municipal buildings. And then they go on to say some things that have been already stated. Now I'll turn to my comments. First of all, and Alder Nabel talked about this, the implicit idea that the city, i.e. the council, brought this idea forward or approves it is not true. This is the first public discussion we have had with this with council members present. The comment that 10 meetings by the county were held, putting a list of meetings on the schedule that no one or few people attend is not public information. That's covering your bases. The comment was made that, well, the mayor and the executive and the correct committee of county members should be able to get together and decide on these things and move things forward. I just want to comment that at the Space and Needs Committee, the public was not allowed to speak. That's my understanding. The city-county swap first came before Finance Committee in closed session. Therefore, of course, this is the correct and appropriate place for this to be discussed. It's a major financial issue. And to Mayor Wiese, once again, it's sort of jaw-dropping. And I'm glad this was all recorded, because tonight was exemplified some of the ways in which you try to shut down and control discussion in indirect and implicit ways. You have tried to, through this conditional use thing, try to place in the minds of alders and some members of the public as well that they cannot discuss this, that we can't have this conversation. You've done the same thing, and you did the same thing with open meetings law, and I brought that forward, and people can go back to the time in which I made that an agenda item and also wrote an extensive memo about that that's in public record. So council members are still confused, even though the attempt was made to clarify open meetings, that it simply has to be noticed. And alders getting together is not a violation of open meetings law. The problem is noticing it. But still, there's confusion on it. And tonight you have planted, quite intentionally, in my view, this sort of fear that, oh my gosh, we're going to get in trouble. And you implicitly, or you didn't implicitly do it, you were directing that at me because you know I wrote a letter in the Portage County Gazette stating my position. I'm not going to apologize for that. I think it's important that alders take positions and be clear and not do things in indirect ways. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I would ask that anybody in the overflow room to step in this room and make your statements. Thank you. Alderperson.
Kira Zarazua, District 4 Alderperson. I just want to say that we are
are talking a lot about downtown, and that's someone that's not represented here right now. So I think the Downtown Alliance and all the business owners impacted by this or potentially impacted really want to have the opportunity to be heard as well at some point. So I know this isn't, there's not any action right now, but just keeping in mind, it's not just all of us individuals looking at this, but the huge impact it would have on all those business owners. We spend so much time as a council revitalizing downtown and thinking very carefully about how we can make decisions that improve our downtown. So to have this come forward, for some of us, it seemed all of a sudden. I'm new to the council. I was not part of the March closed session, obviously. So this is just new information to process, and really a lot more parties, I think, need to be a part of this discussion than what we have right here in this room. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief?
I checked the overflow, no one wants to speak.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here? One more thing.
I guess, Carol Malewski again, Stevens, 2125 Clark. I guess, is there not a place in Stevens Point that we do not need an overflow room? Because if I were sitting in that other room, I wouldn't be happy. There's probably a place at the university. We could cooperate with them, right?
It's possible that we could find a place to handle every amount of people, but even when we have it in the courtrooms, we were having issues with overflow, and we'd have to open
Right,
up
but that
additional
was in-
courtrooms.
But that was, right. The courtroom isn't a good place, because particularly that one, half of the room is filled with board members or council members. So that's not a good place. The nature of that place is there's 2 benches in the back, and the rest of them are down the hall. But it seems to me that even that the Pinery room at the library perhaps is bigger.
It would hold this many people, but
At
we've had
least.
meetings where it wouldn't be enough.
Okay, but perhaps at the university there's a room, because this is a really important decision, and more people should be in the room physically. Thank you.
Okay, I guess,
I have one comment.
oh,
Mike.
yes, as an alderman or committee member?
Alderman. One comment that I would like to make, I think a good point that Mr. Holman made was that there's been discussions about the county courthouse and the jail for about 15 to 20 years. And for so many years, it has been silent. And as Mr. Holman has stated, infrastructure doesn't care about a lot of things. And having worked in the courthouse for years, on the surface, things don't really look that bad, really. But the AC, the heating, the drain, the roof leaking, the water damage, I mean, that's just been going on for years and years. And the county and the city has just put basically Band-Aids on everything. And for so many people, unless you work in the courthouse, you really don't see this. I know Judge Finn, for years, I mean, he has been in the courthouse, and he knows the work that needs to end up being done. And when I first got here in 2008, which was a long time ago, they were talking about it then. And now there's finally the discussion to finally get something moving on this, or else the courthouse cannot take too many more of the patch this, Band-Aid this before something major happens, and the county is going to be forced. I mean, the security issues alone, or one incident away from something major that's going to, from something that's going to majorly happen there, from having to have to walk the inmates from the jail to the courthouse, isn't the most secure way of doing things. And again, for a lot of people who maybe just go down to the courthouse once, twice a year, I don't think they notice the work that really needs to end up being done there. And for at least this discussion to be made as an option, I'm not pro this or against this, but something does need to end up being done. our courthouse is going to fall apart before we get anything done. And we're going to be forced at some point just to the water damage, plumbing, heating, cooling, other things that are falling apart. We're going to have to make a major investment on a very short timetable because the Band-Aids aren't going to fix it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm done.
Alderperson Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the audience and our guests from the county. This is, a person called me and asked if I would read this into the record because he cannot be here. It's a friend of mine, and then I also have short comment as well. So if I may read this into the record.
Yes.
Okay. I am writing to address the subject of the proposed real estate swap with Portage County. As a taxpayer in both the city and the county, I am deeply skeptical of this proposal. The city spent roughly $2.5 million for the 80 acres in the East Park Commerce Center that was included to include the Oso's Brewery on the southern portion. In May of 2018, the Finance Committee approved $1.2 million in borrowing for the Oso's project, and presumably the balance of the purchase came from the TID for the Commerce Center. With the Oso's project on hold, there is no increment coming off this land to help pay back the TID borrowing. Transferring the parcel north of the proposed Oso site to Portage County will only further challenge the ability of this land to yield tax revenue needed to pay off debts we incurred when buying it. In hindsight, it seems like the purchase of the 80 acres was premature and minimally vetted. It is also unclear who exactly has the authority to initiate and execute this type of swapping proposal. The horse seems to be out of the barn with no one in particular holding the doors. Is this really good practice when dealing with millions of dollars in public assets? The Finance Committee could consider adding additional controls to the spending of public money on real estate, including a requirement that staff present the purchase agreements to committee or council before signing off. The public record includes such documentation of a range of recent land purchases, but this particular 80 acres does not appear in the minutes of any city meeting. This makes it surprisingly difficult to answer the simple question of how did the city come to own this piece of land. The Finance Committee may also need to develop a process or protocol for initiating land swaps of this type being discussed today. Ideally, maintaining the flexibility to envision creative solutions while also preventing either party to the swap from spending money on serious design studies before projects are thoroughly vetted by elected officials. Eric Olson, 2025 West River Drive, Stevens Point. I promised him I'd read that, so thank you for your patience. My comments are this. I agree with Alder Morrow. There's much that needs to be done in the courthouse. That is without question. I remember the first time I met with county staff after I came on county board, and it was in the basement in engineering, and it was February and the air conditioner was running. I thought that a little odd. It wasn't one of those balmy February days. It was about 10 degrees and the air conditioner was running. And I agree, we are one bad day away from something happening in our courts, and then we are going to look really, really terrible and try to answer to the families of victims hurt or killed because of that. The discussion of whether this is a rural or an urban this seems to be a rural or urban sort of battle, and that shouldn't be the case. I think the question that has not been asked, and the discussion that I hope we can have, is that what is our vision of criminal justice in Portage County? Because a lot of this footprint is being driven by a 144-bed jail. We have not had a discussion about what it means to restore someone who's violated the law to a productive part of our society, and what is our role. We haven't had that discussion. It's easy to talk about brick and mortar. Quite frankly, that's the easier discussion. I had a very wonderful discussion recently with Assistant District Attorney from Milwaukee County, Jeff Altenberg, about their non-monetary bail program. I'm also on the county side of my elected role, I am now on the non-monetary bail work group, thanks to Chair Haga, he appointed me at my request, and understanding what is the impact of non-monetary bail on the number of jail beds we're going to need. We haven't had that discussion. This is something that is already in the legislature and has bipartisan support. What is the impact of decriminalization of marijuana, which I think we all realize will probably happen? What is that impact on our jail capacity? What is the impact of managing people with mental health issues outside of our criminal justice system? By the sheriff's own words, 30% of our inmates are mentally ill. We have not had that discussion, and all of this is being driven by a 144-bed facility. That's a very large facility, twice the size of what we have, without having a discussion about what our community thinks about people who have violated the law and our role in restoring them back to productive citizens. And until we have that discussion, I don't think we can talk about the size of a jail or a government facility or whether we need 5 courts or 4 courts. I had a very nice discussion recently with Judge Pflugar. He said he'd give me half an hour, and he gave me far more than that. I was very grateful. Up to half of the people currently sitting at any given time are in bail holds. 17-year-olds are currently being held as adults. What happens if we're successful in getting 17-year-olds moved back into our juvenile justice system? These are big policy discussions, and they far outweigh anything about brick and mortar or where the location is or urban sprawl or the fight between rural and urban. The discussion should be about what does this community think about, and the policymakers, and I'm a policymaker on the county board as well, what is our vision for this community, for this county, and those folks who find themselves on the wrong side of the law? That's what I have to say.
Thank you. I guess, no more further statements. Well, I have a thing here, and it's going to show you why we shouldn't do a land swap. It's a blueprint, but I think I have to step down from the chair of finance because I don't want to say it's a part of the chairman of the finance committee talking about this. I want the alderman for the 10th district to.
The chair will now recognize Alder Phillips.
Hey, Alder Phillips.
Yes.
I recognize you.
What I have here, and I don't know why it was never bought before Mike Phillips, 10th District Alderman, bought forward, about 4 years ago, I made a drawing of the county city building. I think few of you might have saw this, but it went nowhere. It shows you could accommodate the space you need for the new courtrooms, the new jail, or in addition to the jail, all new office spaces, for the county needs and not use one more square inch of property. It's called remodel the county city building. This is the plan right here. Shows the square footage. It shows approximate cost. That's what I know is approximate cost is only, you could do all this work, new ventilating system, a more energy efficient building because you filled in the H's and now you don't have this exterior wall. You only got this short one here. Same up here. It's such a common sense approach. I have extra copies later on. Somebody, if you want to see these, you can. With approximate costs of this, remodel the county city building, $10 million. The additions, $20 million. Those are round figures, depending on the square footage. These are all figured at, I believe, $400 a square foot, which right now I think the costs are about $350 a square foot. And the jail, addition to the jail, second floor in the jail with a walkway going across the second floor. Seems like that would work, and you probably have 100 more jail cells, or 75, or whatever fits on the second floor, for $55 million. Probably half of what a new Taj Mahal would cost. I think we really need to look at this and play it out, talk to somebody, get some figures. I think my figures are pretty accurate. But as 10th District Alderperson, the people in my district don't want to move out to the outskirts of town. They want to stay uptown and for a whole less money. Thank you.
And I now give back the chair.
Thank you, Alderperson. Okay, I think we beat everything to death on that project. The only thing I'm going to do is next week, if the mayor would put this agenda item of a land swap on the agenda for action.
Mr.
And
Chairman?
it's up to you.
Just for clarification, because I know there was some concern about the wording of the agenda. This wording of the agenda came right from the alderperson who requested it. When we talk about property exchange, can you be more
okay.
specific on what we would like to talk about or take action on?
About the land swap for properties, I'm not against conversation about any land swap, that's okay. It's about the land swap for the 20 acres out in the, is that Commerce Center?
East Park Commerce Center.
East Park
So
Commerce Center.
specifically, discussion and possible action, well, there's not even really a proposal, it's an idea, but in
But I
regards
mean,
to
whether
that
we want to keep
parcel.
talking about it, right.
Okay,
I
and
think
we'll
we
run
need
it through the
answers.
city attorney. Nancy, does that sound reasonable enough? Yep, and that's what Logan had always said as well. So
Okay.
we will get something on the council agenda.
Thank you. Next item, Corey's somewhere, what are you left?
Even more fun.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right,
This- I know he is.
Even more
He's
fun.
got a little presentation on
Can we just
this.
stretch? I need
Or
to
just-
stand for a moment.
Just a minute or two here.
Yeah.
Let's take a minute to stretch.
Yes, thank you.
Thinned out.
Everybody, we are back in session.
Missing them.
So,
Call the meeting to order.
Is that part of the committee anyway?
Just the mayor? I thought
okay,
Great.
so I just wanted to do a quick review of kind of the budget timeline, and then also give you a few initial indications as far as how the budget is looking for 2020. And also, since we really had planned it in advance last year, we talked a lot about some of the tentative things that we were planning on for 2020. So I kind of wanted to refresh that conversation as well, because I know that we do have a couple of new alderpersons, and also that a lot happens in a year, and sometimes we forget, maybe all the details. So just quickly wanted to throw the capital budget timeline up here. So right now, the departments have all submitted their capital requests, and we're going through those, compiling those. And then typically what'll happen is the mayor and I will meet with each department. We'll try to develop a proposal that's works as far as that's within line of the funds that we have available. That'll actually be next month. That proposal will be presented to the Finance Committee. And then typically that meeting, we don't make any decisions on it right away, because that's sort of your first glance at it. And then for October Finance and October Council, then we'd be looking at any modifications or approval of that. Yes.
Are we going to do, as I had requested last year, and we ended up doing, is marrying the operational budget and the capital budget as one document and approving it all together?
Well, so when you get the total budget to approve in November, it does go all together as one document. It's just that we used to run the process through where basically we did it all at once, and that was kind of a lot to go through at one time. So that's why we take capital first and then operating second, just so that there's enough time to kind of give each one its due diligence. So,
Yeah, I can see reviewing them separately, but they really are one document, so.
yeah, they are. I guess the only thing they'd be, different pots of money. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of, and sometimes there can be a little confusion there as far as, okay, well, why can't we, rather than do this road project, why can't we hire more people? And you say, well, that's because capital, we're borrowing for that,
Right.
and we need to borrow for a public project, so, or.
We all got that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Sure. Yeah, so, and of course, it's one of those things where, sometimes you have newer people who, we need to kind of cover those basics again. So then basically, October 21st would be kind of the final approval for capital, and then yes, that would go forward then for November to be approved as one document. And then as far as our timeline for the operating budget, August, department heads fill out their budget worksheets for their discretionary line items, and then that proposal is actually presented at a special finance committee on October 28th, and then you'd also have discussion and any modifications at the finance committee for November, and then final adoption of the whole thing, both capital and operating, would be the November budget, or the November council meeting. So last year we talked a lot about sort of two big concerns that we had citywide. One was employee wages, especially with low unemployment and with a lot of baby boomers retiring. And the other was need for additional staff. So we had figured out a plan basically to focus on employee wages for the 2019 budget. And last year we did a 3.25% cost of living adjustment to do as much as we could to address that. And then the plan was to focus on adding new positions for the 2020 budget. One of the reasons why we wanted to focus on that for 2020 was because we were expecting a better year for 2020, and it was a little bit of a bigger financial lift as far as to be able to add those new positions.
I'm sorry, could you go back a minute?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
I was just wondering, I didn't see the 2019 budget for the wages, but now I see it. Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to make sure.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, it's up there. So, and then this is what we had been talking about as far as the new position requests. We had 2 for police, 1 for fire. Department of Public Works, we have half of a city engineer. The other half would be paid for by the utilities, so only half would have to be paid for with the general fund budget. Not that we're getting half of an engineer. And
sometimes I wonder about engineers, though.
Yeah, sure. And then 1 person at parks, and then we also talked about a halftime floater, and I think that's one that staff is still discussing a little bit internally. And
And on what level floater? Is this someone who's like floater to streets and then parks and maybe utilities, or is this floater someone who can provide administrative support?
Mm-hmm.
That's
and that's kind of the discussion that we have to still have to an extent. We've had it somewhat as far as just the challenge. Ideally, it would be really nice to have, somebody who can come in and be like that super person who can come in and do everything we need them to do and, go over to any department and do everything. But that might not be the most reasonable expectation. So I think that's something that we're still kind of wrestling with if we still want to pursue that is, for a floater position, what is really reasonable?
Yeah, job description would be a little weird.
Yeah. So that's something that I think internally we kind of have to flush out what exactly that would potentially look like. I would say that's one that, we just need to have some internal discussions on if that's something we still want to pursue.
I think Paul has a question for you.
Information in even number of years, especially with the presidential election, the board positions envision a hard time coming in and assisting with presidential primary and presidential election in November with voter registration, early voting, and that type of thing. That was part of the intention for.
Very good. And for those who didn't hear the clerk, he's talking about those years of presidential election where the clerk can use a lot of extra support to make sure our elections are secure.
Yes, absolutely. We all know that the clerk's office is very busy during elections, especially for some of the bigger elections. So moving into 2020, kind of the initial look, and of course, we still need to get a lot of numbers back and everything. So this is very preliminary, but we do have our net new construction number from the state. It is 3.99%. So basically what that means is that the property tax base due to new construction, due to new properties being built is 3.99%, which actually is very good. That was actually the highest in Portage County in terms of a percentage. And what that equals in terms of a construction value is a little bit over $76 million in added value. So certainly that's very good. And then the way that the state has levy limits set up is basically your increase in the property taxes that you charge for operations are limited to that net new construction number. So that directly ties into the operating budget and what we're allowed to do for a property tax increase. So this will allow us to do a $453,000 increase in the property tax levy for operations. Now, of course, a good portion of that will need to be used for inflationary increases, especially some of the union settlements that we've had and some other things. We do expect rates for the Wisconsin retirement system to go up. We already do know that. However, we also have a few other pieces of good news. We should be able to reduce workers' compensation premiums for 2020, which should help, and part of that is we changed over to self-insured work comp a few years ago, and now we're finally at a place with our reserve fund where we're able to recognize some of the savings of making that move. And then also should have an increase in interest revenue as well. So these three positives combined should allow us to, and of course it's still early, but allow us to do the bulk of the phase one plan for new positions, barring anything unforeseen. Yes?
On the interest revenue, last year I know some of the interest revenues were used to fund positions. I'm assuming we're going to have a discussion about how we use interest revenue, sort of a policy on how we're going to be using interest revenues?
We can certainly talk about it. As far as, I mean, I do not intend to come back with a proposal to, you know, use it for my office or anything. So basically, the use of that, the intention would be to help fund the overall, the phase one.
Okay. But we will have a discussion about how that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so typically what we'll do with the budget is we'll say, okay, you know, here's sort of our positives, here's our negatives, and then you can follow, okay, where the money is going. So basically, you know, here's the increase in fixed costs, here are the things that are positive, and this is where it's going and what it's, being used for. Yep. So basically, those three positives combined should allow us to go ahead with the bulk of the phase one. The other thing that I just want to touch on is, you know, net new construction is very important, but even with that, property tax revenue is only about half of our operating budget. So even when you think about a number like 4%, it really only lets you increase your operating budget by about 2%. The second biggest source of revenue that we have is state aid, which stays fairly stagnant. So that's just kind of a long-term challenge that we have is, you know, even if we can have net new construction of 2 or 3%, once you figure out what that percentage is for the whole budget, it still doesn't always leave you a lot of flexibility. I think this year what it really does is it lets us really cover those inflationary costs with a little bit left over, and then with some of these other things, helps us to really make something happen. So, okay. And then also, I do want to talk about the implications of the new construction adjustment, just because I know that people don't like surprises. But basically, if growth happens outside of a TIF district, what happens is the increase in the tax base offsets the increase in the amount of taxes collected. So in that case, you would not really expect any increase in taxes, and we'd have more money. Now, if growth happens primarily in TIF districts, you have that increase. It still counts toward that net new construction number, so it still counts for the state to be able to say, okay, you know, you've had this much in new construction, but that increased property tax base stays with that TIF district instead. So the end result of that is that that does result in a tax increase if we still take that adjustment. And that would be largely the case for the 2020 budget. Most of that growth was inside of TIF districts. And of course, there's no requirement to take it. We can also roll it over, but I think we have some pretty solid plans as far as the reasons why, if we have this flexibility, we want to use it. I just want to make it clear that, you know, even though taxes would go up in this case, you're also getting something in exchange. Really, what you're getting with that is an option to do something that you can do if you want to. You know, you don't have to. As far as what we would be looking at for an increase, currently we're at a tax rate of $9.65 per thousand in value. And last year I projected an increase of about 30 to 35 cents for a 2020 adjustment based on the extra new construction. And that still is about what it's looking like. So I would say if I had to predict a number right now, and again, it's still early, but I'd say it's going to probably be, you know, in the $9.95 to $10 range. Sounds like a lot. It actually works out to an increase of about 3 to 4%. And last year, there was a 1% increase. We went up 9 cents, so 9 cents on $9 is 1%. That year, we did try to keep it pretty minimal due to the revaluation. It definitely shifted a lot of tax base or tax burden around, so people were still kind of readjusting from that. And then also the increase in capital that we had as well. So I did want to throw that out there, and also just to note that the school district referendum will also be going into effect. So, you know, people should expect that there will be some increase in taxes for the bills that they've given.
Corey, I know we talked about that, and it was on the referendum, but did you get a ballpark number on what it would be for a per thousand or $100,000 home, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it should be, looks like about $1.
Yeah, because that's not just the city, that's district-wide, which is outside the city as well.
Yes.
I believe the healthcare center referendum comes in as well.
Okay.
It's going up $1 from where it was?
For the school district, it looks like it's going to be about in that. I mean that's a rough per
$1,000 of value on your home.
Yeah, but they were at $9, let's say, last year per thousand. Now they're going to be.
Well, that's a real rough estimate.
Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too far as speaking for the school district.
Right.
That's just a rough estimate that actually I got off of their borrowing documents and kind of figured it out. So.
Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
And I guess maybe this is just, I'm trying to understand what you're stating here, or maybe a few slides back, you said that basically we can increase our spending 3.99%, 4%. But due to most of that growth was in TIF, that increase in our spending is going to be on the shoulders of the taxpayers.
Yes.
So what happens when these TIFs start to retire and we see this big jump in
So,
revenues based on, you know, that everything is going right to the general fund instead of paying these TIF, or paying this debt in the TIF districts? Are we gonna reduce the taxes on people then?
that's how it's supposed to work. So basically what happens,
I can't see that happening.
First one retires in 2028.
yeah.
I'm a little nervous with, you know, you had said it's an option to increase.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with all the other stuff going on with the school district, with the county, I just want to be a little careful. I mean, we have to remember the taxpayers here.
I'm with you.
Yep.
So, just because we can, I don't know if we should.
And I think that's a fair conversation to have. You know, I think as far as what we're putting on the table as far as what that money would go toward, or if a taxpayer asks, what am I getting for that? I guess I'd go back to, okay, I mean, this is sort of what you'd be getting.
Yeah.
And then I think it's a matter of, you know, okay, I mean, if people want to have a discussion about, you know, do we think that this is worth paying more in taxes for or not? I think that's a fair discussion.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason, I don't know if Corey touched on that because I was out taking a call, but I asked the department heads to keep their operational budgets at no more than 1% increase.
Yeah.
It doesn't compete with the cost of living. Paper goes up, staples go up, all of these things go up. But keeping that at 1% affords us the opportunity to go with what was discussed at council and voted on at council and the department heads about putting in these additional positions. That's still a choice, but the recommendation was based on the council decision and department head decisions and discussions from last year.
Well, and
Go
yeah,
ahead.
thank you very much. I think your point is well taken. So within that range, we have latitude to say and prioritize these things so that we can look at that range and say, this is where we're comfortable, we're willing to see that increase if we've, you know, got a floater. I like the term, but just,
Yeah.
sorry, or whatever the case may be. So your point is well taken, but I think looking at that range and saying, maybe you're not comfortable with 4%, maybe it's closer to 2.5 or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think those are all legitimate conversations to have as part of a budget process. So, and I just kind of wanted to get this in front of you.
Yeah.
You know, even though we did talk to an extent last year, get it in front of you again so that, you know, we can kind of get back into budget mode and think about these things again and, you know, without having to hurry up and make a decision. Okay. So then, kind of to look ahead as far as what do I expect 2021 and 2022 to look like? We do have a lot of new construction in the pipeline, which is good. It's about a 2-year delay as far as which budget it's going to hit. So in other words, the construction that happens between January 1st of 2019 and December 31st of 2019 will affect your 2021 budget as far as what you have for the new construction adjustment. And looking at what's happening for 2019, we've got a lot of it that's in the pipeline but still needs to break ground. So we're just kind of doing a back of the napkin calculation with Michael, the community development director. We're thinking probably not a lot of flexibility for 2021 based on new construction. Hopefully 2022, there should be a little bit more flexibility, assuming that these projects do move forward. And then also if a project is partially completed, so let's say it starts in October of this year and part of it is done, just the part that's completed counts toward that new construction number. It's called a partial completion. So, but typically what we see is, you know, the first maybe month or so on a project, it's a lot of dirt work and you're not adding a lot of value necessarily just because it's a lot of site work and so forth. So then what this also means, kind of talking about these other concepts as far as how this works with growth in TIF districts. And again, a lot of this new construction is in TIF districts that we have in the pipeline. So you're looking at probably a lighter tax increase for 2021 and probably being a bit heavier for 2022, if that happens. So then moving on, of course, and I realize that a lot of you already know some of these things, but basically we obviously have our levy limits, and we have pretty much been taking the maximum of those limits. Now, we can obviously use the debt service exemption to raise taxes for capital projects. And that's important because capital continues to be a challenge. We did our capital analysis before, and we developed a plan to say, okay, here are all of our assets, here's how often they need to be replaced, and here's the replacement cycle of all of them. The thing that didn't take into account was it didn't take into account adding any new assets or any new amenities. So that's something that I think we continue to struggle with, because at the time it was kind of like, okay, well, we're making this big adjustment. I don't think that there was comfort to go any farther than that, but I think through the course of time we're seeing, okay, realistically things are going to come up that are new assets that we may want to do. And then also the other thing that the capital plan didn't do was it put us on a course to be sustainable, but it didn't really give us any extra oomph to try and catch up. And as we know, our streets definitely need some attention, and we're pretty far behind. And it's just a difficult situation that we're in, being as far behind as we are. So this is what we're looking at for the capital request versus the budget for the next 5 years. For 2020, we have a capital budget of $5.8 million, and we have requests of $11.4 million. So requests are about double the available funds.
If anybody's got any ideas, I'm
Yeah.
open.
And then basically, we'd plan on increasing, the capital budget with inflation over time. So that's sort of this line. And you can see that really every year is full except for, there's a little bit of room here in 2024, but once we have to start moving stuff out of 2020, for sure there will be something that gets pushed back in there. Yeah.
Well, I think it should be noted too, because many people in the audience probably don't realize that we have a sustainable capital plan, and the thing is to try and balance what we're borrowing with what we're paying off, and then also staying within that self-imposed limit of our borrowing cap to be responsible. So I think that's important. So if we were irresponsible, we could spend the $11 million. But we've set standards and policies that say this is where we want to be. So I just want the public to know that.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important. So a question is sort of, okay, how do we address these capital needs? I mean, we can raise taxes to fund capital, but how do we address those needs while keeping tax increases reasonable? So in this, I'll just throw this out there as an idea of something that we could do, is we could set a target percentage for increases in the tax levy, sort of as a matter of policy, to say, this is really what we're comfortable with it going up. Say that's 2.5%, 3%, whatever that number is. And then in years with low operating increases, like 2021, where you don't have a lot of new construction, so you don't really have the ability to raise taxes for operations, even if you wanted to. Well, in a year like that, you could add in a little bit more for capital so that we can make a little bit more progress and keep that sustainable. And then in years with higher operating increases, possibly 2022, if all these projects break ground and we get a little bit more flexibility, then maybe you're not really taking that year to increase your capital budget very much, because your increases are really going on the operating side. So that's just an idea that I just kind of wanted to throw out there, just because it is sort of a continuing discussion as far as, okay, what do we do with capital, and how do we keep up with it? How do we kind of pull ourselves out of the hole as far as where we are with the condition of infrastructure and the condition of roads, and then of course without having a huge tax increase, especially given some of the other increases that have happened and that are going on. So that's the end of my presentation. If anyone has any other questions or other kind of thoughts on.
One more.
Call them this week.
Call them this week?
Ask your question.
Well, there's some discussion, and I think you're aware of it, about our lower grades, the lowest of our paid employees, and trying to lift them. That percentage, and I think you probably came up with this idea, is that being included as we look at this so that we don't lose sight of the fact that we need to look at those folks at the lower end of the scale and make sure they're adequately addressed.
Yes, and I think, certainly we still have to kind of put it all together as far as what we can do, but, certainly I think we kind of have the dual priorities of compensation and staffing that were identified, and, one thing that I will say is that the issue of compensation didn't go away after last year. I think what we did last year helped.
Yes.
And I think it was a step in the right direction and something that we needed to do, but certainly, you're still seeing low unemployment. You're still seeing some pressure on wages for sure. You've got people who are retiring like crazy, and so the competition for skilled workers is definitely there, and it's something that I would agree, we can't lose sight of.
No, and
Not going away.
I promised I would keep on this,
Thank you,
and to the
Corey.
streets and parks folks, I will keep on it.
Chief's got a question.
Okay.
Well, I'd just like to answer Alderperson Johnson's question. We are working on it internally, the department heads. We've gotten everyone involved, so it's, as you know, an involved project. And we're meeting again within the next week. So I just wanted to let you know, it didn't go on the back burner. We're still working on it with everyone involved, okay?
I completely understand that, but I want those folks to know that I'm still working on with them, so.
And we agree with you. So we're trying to figure out how to do it.
We're all working on it.
Wow,
And I
nobody
said,
ever
no, we
says
agree
that
with
to
you,
me.
but we're trying to figure out a way to
Yeah.
make it happen, that's all.
Not even my staff says they agree with me, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Corey.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Cindy,
And
you
good-
got a question?
I do, I think this is the right place to put it, so.
Well, okay. I'd prefer you call them next week and get your answer, but if you feel the public needs to know about it, go ahead.
Thank you, Cindy Nabel, District 3. And again, this may be something I should bring up later, so you'll let me know. I will have no bad feelings about it, okay? Joel did get some of mine answered right away today, so that was really helpful. But I'm looking at the budget that we got as
That's capital.
the capital
Capital
one,
budget,
Capital
right.
budget. And I just want to say again that really wasn't enough time to do do it justice.
That's the very, very preliminary.
Okay,
copy
so
of
I
that. We're
can
meeting-
still talk about it. and-
Absolutely.
Okay, I wasn't sure on
We're going to be
that.
talking about this for, and I don't mean to
Okay.
interrupt, Alder, we're going to be talking about this for a couple of months
Okay,
before you have it for consideration in
All right.
October.
Well, I think when you said not enough time, were you referring to the alderperson capital
yes,
requests?
yes. And so I noticed on one of them that it showed for the park for Emerson for playground equipment. Just want to make sure it doesn't change that. It was moved to 60,000 instead of the original 65,000 that was on there. Really don't want to lose any money at all if we can help it, because we need all we can get, and we're trying to get, we're writing grants already. The Friends are, they've been doing a really, really good job on that, so hopefully we'll get lucky there. The other thing that I have concern, just to keep in mind, we dodged a bullet this year on our water slide and our pools. Because we pushed that budget back twice already. And that filter as I looked at this, and now I don't have the paper here, but, so it's first $100,000 just for the replaced filter system, which needed to be repaired, and it held through the year, almost.
Not done yet.
Not done yet, I know, be careful, right? So it will hopefully. And then we've got all this plaster stuff, that's another over $200,000. That's there, that's in for 2020, so I'm concerned since we pushed that back twice. I just don't want to see it, because we are really tight. So I don't want to see that pushed back, because there's a lot here that it does have a big impact on our community of the people that, for Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, and lots of individuals. And there's something, and maybe we can do something different on the costs there. You know, we charge the same amount per day, okay? Not for the summer, for people that are from outside of the city and those that are in the city. And it would be nice to see that those that live in the city are getting maybe a little bit less, maybe get more people coming, I think. And then, you know, charge 50 cents more to the others, you know. I think that we need to really incentivize the fact that, be proud that we are here in Stevens Point, that we are paying for this through our taxes, and that, so what, someone pays only $1 more for something. But we have to start doing that, because it is on our shoulders, and the people that live within city in Stevens Point are not being paid very well. We have a very low income base here, and it's really important that we're trying to not put such a burden on them. And I know there's a lot of programs there for them to be able to utilize these programs, but if this thing's got pushed back one more time, it got pushed back twice already. So those are my concerns. So I just wanted to make sure I brought them up, and I know that you are all aware of these too, and that they're your concerns also. So thank you.
Thank you. And it is important to note that that's a very good idea that we've been considering. Residents already pay for a lot of these things through their property taxes. It would seem to make sense that non-residents pay a premium because they don't support it through their property taxes. And that's something we can look at. But yes, we've got several big priorities in the capital budget that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of months.
Like park fees, non-resident?
His 2 cents worth.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess, thank you, Corey.
Are you all done, Corey?
We are going to go to the next item.
Claims.
Claims.
Yes, the approval of claims paid. Do I have a motion? And then we'll have discussion?
Motion to approve the claims that have already been paid.
Seconded.
Seconded by Chris Morrow. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say yes. For aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Hearing none? We are adjourned.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.